Back to the verdict, I'm Paula Todd. A medical marijuana activist will not be allowed to smoke pot in jail. Grant Krieger suffers from multiple sclerosis. Correction officials said they would allow him to take medicinal marijuana if he could get the usual federal license, but he was denied the signatures he needed by 2 doctors. The case has opened up a debate on marijuana in jail and the reluctance of doctors to prescribe pot. We're joined from Vancouver by well-known marijuana activist Marc Emery, and here in studio is Dr. Neil Rao. He is CTV's infectious diseases specialist who spent some of his time working in a correctional facility near Toronto. Dr. Rao, this man says he needs to have the marijuana. His family says, or he suffers extraordinary pain. Why should he be denied it in jail?
Well, first of all, in jail there are some logistical issues. If he's got a joint, that's a commodity. I mean, these are people who can fight over a bag of potato chips. But take it away from the jail, let's really get into the issue of does he need pot or does he need the active ingredient of pot, the cannabinoid. There are medical forms of the cannabinoid that one can get prescribed by a doctor that are not smokable. There's a spray form that you put in the mouth, and there's actually a pill form. Some people who take the recreational form of pot claim it's not the same effect or not the same punch in terms of pain control, but there are other alternatives that he would still have access to.
Mark, what do you think when you hear that this man says he's going to suffer because he won't have what he calls his medication in prison?
Well, I believe him. I've known Grant Krieger for 11 years, and he's a beloved and sympathetic person in our movement. And if we're sending people to jail for 4 months who are crippled up men, thin and spindly, look like they're dying, for 4 months because they were distributing marijuana, we live in a sick and sadistic society, and we should never be putting people in jail for something as trivial as distributing marijuana. Marijuana should be available. We already have synthetic pharmaceutical drugs that contain marijuana. Sativex is approved in Canada. That's whole plant medicine. We have a synthetic molecule that replicates THC. Why don't we just let these poor people have their THC and stop persecuting?
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Rao, one of the things I mentioned is that you can actually get a license to take marijuana as a medication if it is deemed to be necessary. But you have, here's the license. It's interesting. You get it on Health Canada's website, but you need the signature of doctors. And both the Canadian Medical Association and the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons have been less than enthusiastic about pushing doctors to sign. How come?
Well, part of it is that the evidence that shows that these are the best and the only therapies available is weak. It's not to say that they may not be the best, but they haven't been formally studied. If you look at the way most drugs get approved and tested, they go through a very formal regulatory process. This is a, quote, drug that gets in through the back door, and it is a controlled substance, and it has the potential to be abused, and in this particular case it has a potential to be shared with your friends instead of just being used for your own personal use, which may well be legitimate.
Part of the problem. Mark, Mr. Krieger says that he absolutely needs this medication, but many doctors say that they're afraid to sign on the bottom line for stuff like this because, one, the insurance company might not cover their practice if there's some untoward effect, that two, some doctors legitimately think that this might not be the only way to treat certain conditions, and three, I've even heard doctors say, listen, smoking this stuff is really bad for your health, and I'm not in the business of prescribing these things. How do you rebut those concerns?
Well, the doctor shouldn't even be a factor in this. Doctors shouldn't be prescribing marijuana. People should be able to use it as they see fit. After all, who's in pain? Who can properly, accurately assess what kind of pain any individual is going through, unless you're that person? And for me, I'm not so sanctimonious as to presume that I know superior, infallible knowledge that somehow affects your health. If you think something's good for you, then I'd say you should be allowed to try that without going to jail, and you should be allowed to supply others who need to get it. The government currently sells marijuana for $150 an ounce. They're trying to stop all the licensees from being able to grow their own marijuana, and they are selling a swaggy product at black market prices. The government is completely dishonorable and disingenuous in this entire affair, and it's scandalous that we've sent this frail old man to jail for 4 months.
So, Mark, if we use your argument, we should have this sitting on the counters of our homes. It should be like a once-a-day, vitamin with iron. That's the problem with this perspective. It makes it look like this is not an addictive substance. It's not as bad as some of the other ones out there. Perhaps it shouldn't be a criminalizable use, but it is not a completely safe substance, and that's why it's a controlled subject, and this completely ignores that part of the argument.
That's not true. It's a controlled substance because all the marijuana thinkers in this country, the millions and millions of us smoke marijuana, we don't accept your one-book dogmas, whether it's your book of medicine, whether it's the book of the law, the book of the Bible. We don't accept those. We're free thinkers. We want to choose for ourselves. We're autonomous human beings. We're entitled to put in our body what we choose it. And arrogant people like you are the most infuriating of all because you put yourself in a position of God to determine what my friend Grant Krieger and myself and others like me have to be able to put in our body. We have to come to you for permission, groveling before you, the doctor, and you, the state.
Final word to Dr. Rao.
Well, it's not motivated by religion, but all I can say is that there are harmful effects of cannabinoids, and if this is used in a wanton fashion where teenagers are getting a hold of it, we also have to have the other side of the coin. We do not want people flying planes and driving cars high on hash. On the other hand, it may have some medical value for certain circumstances, and that still needs to be explored.
So until we find out a man has to sit in jail for 4 months withering away, is that right?
Well, he shouldn't share it with his friends. That's a whole other story.
Oh, I see. An old man of 55. You think he's sharing it with friends, do you? You think they can't get weed elsewhere at $150 an ounce?
That is the end of our discussion for tonight. I'm sorry we've come to the end of our time, but I want to thank marijuana activists, as you may have noted, Marc Emery, he's in Vancouver, and Dr. Neil Rao is right here in studio. When we return, my closing argument, everybody deserves a hug. You're watching The Verdict on CTV Newsnet.
And what do you think of that?
Well, I got a little worked up about that one. It was fun. It was a national broadcast. It was seen all across Canada. I enjoyed defending Grant Krieger, and I hope he was able to see it in jail. I was thinking about that at the time it was going out. If maybe they'd have told him it was coming up, he got a chance to see it. So maybe I'll hear about that. And I hope he thought I served him well, and I hope he made some good points. Poor Grant's still in jail, getting worse, in the medical infirmary already, and he's only been in the jail like 4 days now, 3-4 days.